Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Sensei Q&A. This is the series where I answer the musical questions that you asked me on Instagram. To get involved in a future one of these, make sure you follow me over there. If you want to jump around to any of the topics, I'll put up timestamps in the description. Before we get into it, let me quickly tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare, an online learning community that offers membership to something with real practical value. They have classes across the entire spectrum, from meditating to learning how to code. Recently, I moved out of an apartment into a house, and one of the things I've been most excited about is starting a garden here. So to prepare myself for this endeavor, I watched Gardening 101 with Geraldine Lavin. I learned a lot about how to prepare soil, how to prevent fungus, and stuff like that. I also learned that it is way more work than I thought, and I'm not sure I want to start a garden anymore. However, it is only the beginning of winter, and maybe I'll have a change of heart by spring. If not, Jenny and I watched it together, and she still wants to give it a go. Because of this lesson, I think there's a significantly higher chance that we will have fresh tomatoes in 2021. Skillshare is incredibly affordable. An annual membership costs less than $10 a month for unlimited access to their entire library. And the first 1,000 of you to use the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Anyways, let's get to it. To kick things off, Arjun Two Steps, whose username seems quite familiar, I think I've answered some of his questions here before, asks, what are altered chords? I should make a couple notes before getting into this advanced theory stuff. First of all, there are some different trains of thought as to how to approach some of these topics. Classical musicians often think of things one way, whereas jazz musicians will think of it another way. I'll explain this, how I was taught and how I think about it. But even if we use different terminology to explain this stuff, at the end of the day, it all sounds the same. The other thing I'll mention is that I'm going to explain this assuming that you have a base understanding of musical theory. If everything I talk about sounds like total gibberish to you, I would recommend checking out my 2 courses on theory so that we're at least on the same page. Okay, altered chords. Altered chords are a dominant 7 type of chord that are derived from the 7th mode of the jazz minor scale, the altered scale. As we know, a typical dominant 7 chord has the notes root, 3rd, 5, flat 7. An altered dominant 7 takes that dominant 7, removes the 5th, giving you the root, the 3rd, the flat 7, and then to extend that further, you would use the flat 9, the sharp 9, the sharp 11, or the flat 13. Some people think of this chord as a dominant 7, but the 5th is flat or sharp. Those are the same notes or enharmonic equivalents as the sharp 11 or flat 13, so I just think of it as a dominant 7 without that 5 at all. So to summarize, an altered dominant 7 is when you play a dominant 7 without the 5 and then add any of the following extensions: flat 9, sharp 11, or flat 13. I mentioned earlier that this chord is derived from the altered scale, so let's take a quick look at that. The scale has the tones root, flat 9, sharp 9, 3rd, sharp 11, flat 13, flat 7, back to the root. This chord is essentially just stacking notes from that scale on top of a root. The next question is, where would one find this chord? The most common place that I see it is when you have a 5-7 altered that resolves down a 5th to a 1 minor. So for example, say I have an E7 altered, and remember, I can kind of pick and choose the extensions that I put on this chord. My E7 altered here has a sharp 9 and a flat 13, and this chord would resolve down to an A minor. In jazz, this is commonly preceded by a 2 minor 7 flat 5, so in this situation that would give us B minor 7 flat 5, E7 altered, down to the A minor. Let's hear that one more time. Another less common but very cool place that you can hear this is when it resolves down a half step to the 1 major 7, which is often preceded by a 2 minor 7, which would give us a 2 minor 7, flat 2 7 altered, down to the 1 major 7. In this situation, I'm in the key of C, so I have a D minor 7, going down to a D flat 7 altered. In this situation, I'm using the sharp 11 and flat 13, and then I go down to the C major 7. Unlike other chords, altered 7s are interesting because they don't tell you exactly what notes to play. Instead, you use your discretion to pick from a series of extensions. As far as soloing goes, you can play the altered scale over top of an altered 7 chord. I'll do an example here where I play the E altered scale over top of an E7 alt, which eventually resolves down to the A minor. But be warned, this is not a scale that I use especially often, but I will give it my best effort. All right, right, let's move on from the dense harmony. Next up, Short Boy Hayden asks, how much should I practice every day? This is a question that is different for every musician. What I can do is try to help you find your answer. First of all, and perhaps the most important thing, is what feels right. When it stops being fun, or your mind starts to wander, or you start to burn out, then it's time to stop. The other thing you want to think about is what are your goals in music and how can you best structure your practice to fulfill those goals? I call this the goal hierarchy, where you take your big goal and then look at all the smaller and smaller goals leading up to it. Let's do an example of this. Say my big goal is that I want a career in music. My idea of how to get there is that I'll go to school for music. To do that, I'll need to pass an audition, and that audition requires me to play a jazz standard. At this point here, I can begin to pinpoint what I need to practice. In order to play a jazz standard, I need to learn my modes and my seventh chords. I also should probably spend some time learning a solo that someone else played over that standard. At this point, I might think that I need to allocate, 30 minutes to each of those things. So I would spend 30 minutes working on my modes, 30 minutes practicing my seventh chords, 30 minutes working on learning that solo that someone else played, and then 30 minutes putting it all together and practicing playing over top of that jazz standard. In this hypothetical situation, I would try to practice for 2 hours every night and see how this goes. If I feel like I can do more without burning out, I would do it. If I found that this was too much, then I would cut back a bit. By doing this type of planning, you can make sure that you're working on things that are important to you, and you can see how your hard work is feeding into your bigger goals. Mahoshi Yamashita says, the action on my cheap guitar is too high for me to play well, but I'm poor, what now? The first thing I would do is look up some guitar setup tutorials on YouTube and see if you can fix the action. You might be a bit scared to try and work on your guitar, but really it's very hard to mess it up beyond the point of repair. Just don't force anything or twist it beyond the point that feels natural. The one thing you want to be a bit cautious with is adjusting the truss rod, but even that, use the right tools. Don't force it, do it incrementally, watch a tutorial, and you should be fine. And if it seems that the guitar is beyond saving, I would just accept that, put it in an open tuning, and work on my slide playing. Next up, Leoi Unti asks, how do you play better solos over a 12-bar blues? The amount of things that you can apply to that simple 3-chord progression are endless, so I'll offer you one tip. When we start soloing over top of the blues, we normally use the minor pentatonic scale over all 3 chords. This is great because it gets us in the soloing ball game, but if you want to take it one step further, you can begin to change that scale so that it follows the underlying chords. So say I'm the good old key of A, my first chord is an A7. Instead of soloing over top of that with my A minor pentatonic scale, which has the notes A, C, D, E, G, I might add my C sharp in there because that note is contained within the A7 chord. Here's an example of this in practice. Pay careful attention to this note, the C sharp, as I try to highlight that note with my line. When my D7 comes along, I'm going to go back to my A minor pentatonics. I'm not going to play that C sharp because that note is not in that D7 chord. And when the E7 comes along at the turnaround, I'm going to play that A minor pentatonic, but instead of playing the G, I'm going to play a G sharp because that note is in the E7. By doing this, you're beginning to highlight your chords and play the changes, which adds a whole new dimension to your soloing. I'll do an example here where I play over top of a full pass of the 12-bar blues. See if you can hear the chords within my lines. Moving right along, Ben Darkage asks how to make obscure prog music catchy. Well, my man, you have your work cut out for you, but it's not impossible. I would spend some time really trying to understand the craft of catchy music. The most inherently catchy music out there is pop music, so even if it's not your thing, I would spend some time studying and dissecting the big chart toppers. Learn how to play a song, analyze the chords and melody, and try to figure out what it is about that music that makes it stick in your head. Try even writing some pop music of your own. Repeat this process. Having trained this muscle, when you go back to writing the music of your choice, you'll have a whole new set of tools at your disposal that will hopefully come out in the form of super catchy, obscure prog rock. Roshi Schneid asks, how do I make my singer-songwriter pop guitar parts more interesting? A huge thing I found helpful is learning how to play the melody of your song on the guitar and incorporating that into your parts. So say, for example, I'm playing Mary Had a Little Lamb. If I were just to strum the chords, it would sound like this. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. If I play the melody within my guitar part there, it can make it a little bit more interesting. Let's hear how that sounds. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb. The added bonus of this is it makes it easier to sing if you're not a great singer like myself. You could also add some finger picking to this equation to really take that lamb all the way to school. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Mountain Drew, great name, asks, is it bad to be a guitarist who can play chords but can't name them? If you find that you're having fun and are satisfied with your guitar playing and your music, then there is nothing inherently wrong with whatever approach you take. I will say I could see some situations where this might be a bit limiting, the biggest of which would be if you want to play with other musicians. It's going to be a fairly slow and arduous process teaching them the music that you're working on and vice versa. And last for today, Ben James 107 asks, how would you go into jazz guitar as an intermediate? The absolute best thing you can do is find yourself a good teacher. Nothing can replace that, and if you're serious about it, then that should be priority number one. On a more specific note, I would recommend that you dive into the roots of jazz guitar. Charlie Christian was the early pioneer of the music, and learning some of his solos note for note will lay a strong foundation that you can build on without being too difficult. In fact, this is something that I still do. I've got a book of his transcriptions right here. Whenever I feel like playing guitar without having to be too creative, I just flip this open and learn one of his solos. If you're interested in this book, I'll put up a link to it in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Another Sensei Q&A. I hope you learned something from this video. And if you'd like to get involved in a future one of these, make sure you follow me over on Instagram. Remember to check out the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare, by clicking that link in the description and getting that free trial. They really do offer a great product, and I'm always proud to work with them. If you want to get caught up in the Sensei series, hit that link up there, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new here, and stay tuned for a wide range of musical content. Until next time, I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I will see you again soon.